My older brother, Mason, never missed an opportunity to tell me my music was garbage. Playing with your little toys again, Ethan? He'd sneer, gesturing to my guitars and recording equipment. I tried to ignore it, but his words always stung. My older brother, Mason, never missed an opportunity to tell me my music was garbage. Playing with your little toys again, Ethan? He'd sneer, gesturing to my guitars and recording equipment. I tried to ignore it, but his words always stung, especially coming from him. Mason was the golden boy in our family, the athlete, the scholar, the one who always seemed to do everything right. And then there was me, Ethan, the guy who spent most of his time locked away in his room, strumming chords and writing songs that, according to Mason, sounded like a cat fight in a dumpster. I'd been passionate about music since I was a kid. It started with an old, beat-up acoustic guitar my grandpa left me. I taught myself to play, spending hours figuring out chords and melodies. In high school, I formed a band with some friends, and we even played a few local gigs. It wasn't anything big, but the feeling of being on stage, sharing my music with an audience, was electrifying. Felt like I'd finally found my calling. Mason, of course, had a different opinion. You really think people want to listen to that noise? He'd say, a smirk playing on his lips. You'd have better luck busking on a street corner with a tin can. His words were like little darts, constantly pricking at my confidence. He was always so dismissive, so sure that my passion was nothing more than a childish fantasy. Our parents, bless their hearts, tried to be supportive, but even their encouragement felt a little lukewarm. They'd come to my shows, clap politely, and tell me they were proud of me for pursuing my hobbies. But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't really believe I could make a career out of music. They probably saw it as a phase I'd eventually grow out of, something I'd abandon for a real job like Mason, who was climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious accounting firm in Chicago. After high school, my bandmates went their separate ways, but my love for music didn't fade. I decided to go to a community college nearby, taking general education classes while spending my free time writing and recording music in my makeshift home studio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my sanctuary. I poured my heart and soul into my songs, hoping that one day, someone would hear them and connect with them the way I did. Mason, meanwhile, had moved out and was living the high life in the city. He'd come back for family dinners occasionally, always dressed in expensive suits and talking about his latest business deals. He'd ask me about my music, but it was always with that condescending tone, like he was humoring a child. Still banging away on that guitar, Ethan? He'd say, chuckling. When are you going to get serious about your future? I'd usually just shrug and try to change the subject. There was no point in arguing with him. He'd already made up his mind about me and my so-called career. Things started to get a little better for me a couple of years ago. I started posting some of my songs online, just on a whim. To my surprise, people actually listened. Some even liked them. I started building a small following, and the positive feedback was incredibly encouraging. It wasn't making me rich or famous, but it gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely delusional. I even got a few messages from small independent labels expressing interest in my music. It was all very preliminary, but it felt like I was finally making some progress. I was excited and wanted to share the news with my family. During our next family dinner, I cautiously brought it up. So, you know how I've been posting my music online? I started, trying to sound casual. Yeah, Mason said, cutting me off before I could continue. Still wasting your time with that? I took a deep breath and tried not to let his negativity get to me. Well, actually, I've been getting some attention. A few small labels have reached out. Mason snorted, taking a large bite of his steak. Labels? Seriously? What kind of bottom-of-the-barrel operations are we talking about here? They're independent, I said, trying to defend them. They work with up-and-coming artists. Right, the ones who are never going to make it big, Mason scoffed. Look, Ethan, I appreciate you having your little hobbies, but you need to be realistic. The music industry is brutal. You're never going to make a living playing your silly little songs. His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the content of what he was saying. It was the way he said it with such utter certainty, such complete disdain for my passion. It felt like he was deliberately trying to crush my spirit. Maybe not, I mumbled, looking down at my plate. But it makes me happy. Happiness doesn't pay the bills, Ethan, Mason said, his voice sharp. You need to think about your future. Get a real job, something with stability. Our parents tried to intervene, telling Mason to be more supportive, but the damage was already done. The excitement I had felt just moments before had evaporated, replaced by a familiar wave of self-doubt. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just wasting my time. Over the next few months, Mason's negativity seemed to escalate. He'd constantly send me articles about the struggles of aspiring musicians or tell me about friends of his who had failed to make it in creative fields. It was relentless, and it started to wear me down. I remember one particularly bad day. I had just finished recording a new song that I was really proud of. I sent it to a friend who was also a musician, and he gave me some really positive feedback. Feeling encouraged, I decided to share a short clip of it on social media. Within minutes, Mason commented, "Sounds like something my cat coughed up." I was so angry and hurt. I deleted his comment immediately, but the words lingered in my mind, replaying over and over. Why was he doing this? Why was he so determined to tear me down? I tried talking to him about it once over the phone. "Mason, why are you always so negative about my music?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed dramatically. "Ethan, I'm just being realistic. Someone has to be. You're living in a fantasy world if you think you can actually make a career out of this. But why do you have to be so mean about it?" Depressed. "It's my passion. It's what I love to do. And I love watching sports," he retorted. "Doesn't mean I think I can go pro. You need to grow up, Ethan." The conversation went nowhere as usual. It seemed like Mason was incapable of seeing my music as anything other than a joke. His constant criticism started to affect my creativity. I found myself second-guessing every note, every lyric. The joy I once felt when writing and recording started to fade, replaced by anxiety and the fear of his judgment. Around this time, I started working part-time at a local music store to make ends meet. It wasn't my dream job, but it allowed me to be around music, and I actually enjoyed helping customers find the right instruments and gear. One of my coworkers, an older guy named Jerry, was a seasoned musician himself. He'd played in bands for years and had a wealth of knowledge about the industry. Jerry noticed that I seemed a bit down lately. "You all right, Ethan?" he asked one afternoon while we were organizing some guitars. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to confide in him. I told him about my music, my struggles, and my brother's constant negativity. Jerry listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When I was finished, he leaned against a display case and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Ethan," he said, "there are always going to be people who doubt you, who try to bring you down. Sometimes those people are even the ones closest to you. Maybe they're jealous, maybe they're scared for you, or maybe they just don't understand. But you can't let their negativity define you." He continued, "If you love music, if it's truly your passion, then you have to keep going. You have to believe in yourself even when no one else does. Don't let anyone steal your dream." His words resonated with me deeply. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Jerry's encouragement reminded me why I started making music in the first place, because it made me feel alive. Inspired by Jerry's advice, I decided to focus on my music again, trying to block out Mason's constant criticism. I spent more time writing, recording, and connecting with other musicians online. I even started live streaming some of my performances, which was terrifying at first, but it turned out to be a great way to connect with my growing fan base. Things were slowly starting to look up. My online following continued to grow, and I even started earning a small amount of money from streaming and online sales. It wasn't enough to quit my day job, but it was progress. Then, one evening, I received a message from a music blogger I admired. He had stumbled upon my music online and really liked it. He asked if I'd be interested in doing an interview for his blog. I was ecstatic. This felt like a real opportunity to reach a wider audience. The interview went great. I talked about my music, my influences, and my journey as an independent artist. The blogger was genuinely enthusiastic, and he promised to share the interview on his social media channels. A few days later, the interview was published. I was nervous but excited to see the reaction. I shared it on my own social media, hoping my friends and family would see it. The first few comments were positive, mostly from my online followers. Then, I saw a comment from Mason. My heart sank. What was he going to say this time? His comment was short and brutal. Seriously? This is what you're so proud of? Still playing pretend. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. He couldn't even let me have this one thing. He had to rain on my parade, as always. I wanted to lash out, to write a scathing reply, but I knew that would just give him the attention he craved. Instead, I deleted his comment and tried to focus on the positive feedback I was receiving from others. But Mason wasn't done. He started sharing the interview on his own social media, adding his own sarcastic commentary. "My loser brother thinks he's a rock star," he wrote in one post. In another, he shared a screenshot of my streaming profile with a laughing emoji. It felt like he was actively trying to sabotage me, to undermine everything I was working towards. I was furious and hurt. I couldn't understand why he was being so cruel. I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to confront him face to face. I drove out to his apartment in Chicago the following weekend, my anger simmering beneath a thin veneer of forced calm. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "We need to talk, Mason," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His apartment was sleek and modern, just like I imagined it would be. Expensive furniture, minimalist decor, everything perfectly in its place. It was the opposite of my cluttered, music-filled space. "About what?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "About my music," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "About the way you've been treating me." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go again. Can't you just let it go, Ethan?" "No, I can't let it go," I said, my voice rising. "You've been belittling me and my passion for years. You constantly tell me I'm going to fail, you mock my achievements, and now you're even trying to sabotage me online. Why are you doing this?" Mason scoffed. "I'm not trying to sabotage you. I'm just being honest. You need to wake up and realize that your little hobby isn't going anywhere." "It's not just a hobby to me," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "It's my life. It's what I want to do. And you're constantly trying to tear me down. Because I care about you, Ethan," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I don't want to see you waste your life chasing a pipe dream." "That's not caring," I retorted. "That's being controlling and condescending. You don't get to decide what my dreams are." The argument escalated from there. We went back and forth, rehashing old grievances and trading insults. Mason insisted he was just trying to help, while I accused him of being jealous and insecure. "Jealous?" he scoffed. "Of what? Your little online fame? Please, I have a real career, Ethan. I'm successful. And I'm not," I shot back. "Just because I'm not making millions in a corporate office doesn't mean I'm not successful in my own way. I'm building something I'm passionate about, something that makes me happy. You can't say the same, can you?" He glared at me, his face flushed with anger. "Get out, Ethan," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Just get out of my apartment." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove home, tears streamed down my face. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and a profound sense of disappointment. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, we could finally have an honest conversation, but it was clear that Mason was incapable of seeing things from my perspective. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the argument in my head. I realized that this wasn't just about my music anymore. It was about our entire relationship. Mason had always been critical and dismissive of me, not just my music. He always seemed to feel the need to put me down, to make himself feel superior. I thought about Jerry's words, "Don't let anyone steal your dream," and I knew he was right. I couldn't let Mason's negativity control my life anymore. I had to make a change, even if it meant distancing myself from my own brother. The next day, I made a difficult decision. I wrote Mason an email, pouring out my heart and explaining how his words and actions had affected me. I told him that I needed space, that I couldn't continue to have him in my life if he was going to constantly try to tear me down. I didn't expect him to understand, but I needed to say it for my own sake. I hit send, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was the end of an era, the end of trying to please someone who seemed determined to never be pleased. Now I needed to focus on myself, on my music, and on building a life that was truly my own. The path ahead felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I also felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally break free from the shadow of my brother's judgment and find my own spotlight. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of a much bigger and more unexpected story. Weeks turned into months, and the silence between Mason and me was deafening. My parents called a few times, trying to mediate, but I politely told them I needed more time. Honestly, the distance felt liberating. Without Mason's constant negativity, a weight had lifted. I poured all my energy into my music. I wrote more, I streamed more, and my online community continued to grow. Then, out of the blue, I got an email that made my heart skip a beat. A small but respected independent record label in Los Angeles had heard my music online and wanted to offer me a contract. They liked my sound, my online presence, and they saw potential. It was everything I had been working towards. Couldn't believe it. I read the email over and over, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. This was it. This was the opportunity one had longed for. I immediately called Jerry at the music store, my voice buzzing with excitement. He was thrilled for me and offered some invaluable advice about navigating the music industry. After careful consideration and a few phone calls with the label, I decided to sign the contract. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was a start. They promised to help me record a professional EP and get my music out to a wider audience. I was ecstatic. I wanted to share the good news with my family, but I hesitated when it came to Mason. Part of me still longed for his approval, but the other part was terrified of his reaction. Would he finally be happy for me? Or would he find a way to rain on this parade too? Eventually, I decided to tell my parents. They were overjoyed and incredibly supportive. My mom even teared up a little, saying she always knew I had talent. It felt good to finally have their genuine support. Then came the inevitable question, "Have you told Mason?" My dad asked cautiously. I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm not sure how to." "Well, he's your brother, Ethan," my mom said gently. "He should know." Reluctantly, I agreed. I drafted a simple text message to Mason. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I signed a record deal." I hit send and immediately felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a reply. A record deal? With who? Some garage band operation. There it was. The familiar dismissiveness, the inability to just be happy for me. I sighed and decided not to engage. I didn't reply to his text. The next few months were a whirlwind. I started working on my EP with the label, collaborating with producers and other musicians. It was an intense but incredibly rewarding experience. I felt like I was finally living my dream. Then, a few weeks before my EP was scheduled to be released, I got a frantic call from my mom. Her voice was filled with panic. "Ethan, you need to see this. It's all over the internet." "See what?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mason, he did something awful," she stammered, her voice choked with tears. "He posted something online about your music, about you." I hung up the phone and immediately went to my social media accounts. My notifications were blowing up. There were messages from fans, from friends, even from people I didn't know, all expressing shock and disbelief. I clicked on one of the links that had been shared with me, and my blood ran cold. It was a video, and the title made my stomach churn. "The Truth About Ethan's Music Career? He's a Fraud." I hesitantly clicked play. The video started with Mason's face filling the screen. He looked directly into the camera, his expression a bizarre mix of anger and self-righteousness. "Hey everyone. he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm Ethan's older brother, and I'm here to tell you the truth about his so-called music career. You see, my brother isn't some talented, self-made artist. He's a fake. He buys followers online, he pays for streams, and he steals melodies from other artists. This whole thing is a sham. He went on to present what he claimed was evidence, screenshots of websites where you could buy social media engagement, blurry images that he alleged showed me meeting with shady figures, and snippets of my songs compared side by side with the work of other, lesser-known artists. The comparisons were twisted and misleading, taking short instrumental phrases out of context to make it seem like I was plagiarizing. The video was slickly produced, with dramatic music and text overlays. It looked like he had spent a significant amount of time and effort putting it together. And it was devastating. My mind raced. Why would he do this? Why would he try to destroy my career, especially now that I was finally on the verge of achieving my dreams? The jealousy I had suspected before now seemed like a raging inferno. Within hours, the video went viral. It was shared thousands of times across different platforms. The comments section was a toxic wasteland of accusations and insults directed at me. My online following, which had once been a source of support and encouragement, now turned into a mob of angry skeptics. The record label was furious. They called me immediately, their voices tight with anger and concern. The release of my EP was put on hold indefinitely. My reputation was in tatters. Everything I had worked so hard for was crumbling around me, all thanks to my own brother. I felt numb, betrayed beyond words. I couldn't believe that someone who was supposed to care about me could do something so malicious, so calculated. I tried calling Mason, but he didn't answer. I texted him, demanding an explanation, but he ignored my messages. He had effectively thrown a grenade into my life and then disappeared, leaving me to pick up the pieces. My parents were devastated. They couldn't understand why Mason would do such a thing. They tried to talk to him, but he refused to engage, claiming he was just revealing the truth. I felt completely alone. My dream had turned into a nightmare, and my own brother was the villain in the story. I didn't know what to do. I considered quitting music altogether. The pain and humiliation were almost unbearable. But then, I remembered Jerry's words again. You have to believe in yourself, even when no one else does. Don't let anyone steal your dream. His words gave me a spark of defiance. I wasn't going to let Mason win. I wasn't going to let his lies destroy me. I decided to fight back. I reached out to the music blogger who had interviewed me. I explained what had happened and shared the truth about my music and my journey. He was shocked and offered his support. He wrote a follow-up blog post defending me and debunking Mason's accusations, providing evidence of my genuine online growth and the originality of my music. My record label, seeing the support I was receiving and realizing the extent of Mason's deception, decided to stand by me. They issued a statement condemning the false accusations and reaffirmed their commitment to releasing my EP. It took time, but slowly, the tide began to turn. People started to see through Mason's lies. My fans rallied around me, sharing messages of support and calling out his hateful behavior. The video he had posted started to receive more negative comments than positive ones. Eventually, the whole thing died down. The internet's attention moved on to the next drama. But the experience had left a deep scar. The trust one had once had in my brother was shattered beyond repair. The release of my EP was a success. It wasn't a massive hit, but it garnered positive reviews and reached a decent number of listeners. It was a victory, a testament to my resilience and my refusal to give up on my dream. I never spoke to Mason again. My parents tried to facilitate a reconciliation, but I couldn't bring myself to face him. The hurt was still too raw, the betrayal too deep. I had cut him out of my life, and while it was painful, it was also necessary for my own well-being. Years passed. My music career continued to grow, slowly but steadily. I released more EPs, played small shows, and built a loyal fanbase. I was finally living the life I had always wanted, on my own terms. One day, I received a message request on social media from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was blurry, but the name, it looked familiar. It was Mason. Hesitantly, I opened the message. It was short and to the point. Ethan, it's Mason. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. After all this time, he was finally reaching out. But what did I say? Could I ever forgive him for what he had done? I typed out a reply, then deleted it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The wounds were still too fresh. I closed the message window and put my phone down. A few weeks later, my mom called. Her voice sounded tired. Ethan, she said, Mason's not doing well. What do you mean? I asked, a knot of worry forming in my stomach despite everything. He lost his job, she said. And, well, he's been having a hard time. He asked about you. I didn't say anything for a moment. Part of me felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe a sense of obligation. He was still my brother, after all. Mom, I said finally. I'm not ready to talk to him yet, but tell him I heard. And tell him I hope he gets back on his feet. It wasn't a reconciliation, not by a long shot. But it was a start, maybe. A tiny crack in the wall I had built between us. Life continued. My music kept me busy, and I found happiness in my work and my community. One afternoon, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from a mutual friend. It was a picture of Mason, looking older and a bit worn, but he was smiling. He was holding a guitar. The caption read, "Look who finally decided to pick up an instrument." I stared at the picture, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. Surprise, curiosity, a hint of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to understand. Maybe he was finally finding his own path, just like I had.